Hi, I'm Cheryl Kagan, very proud to be the senator for Gaithersburg and Rockville, and also very proud to be a friend and ally to the nonprofit sector. I'm delighted today to welcome to my Kibbitzing with Kagan podcast, the wonderful Heather Iliff, President and CEO of Maryland Nonprofits. Heather, thank you so much for taking time to chat today.
What a pleasure to be with you, Senator Kagan. It's really a wonderful opportunity.
Thank you. So first we have to talk about you. What a fascinating background you've had. So from working at the Open Society to living in Hungary to being with Maryland Nonprofits for more than 14 years and more than 6 years as CEO. Tell us about your journey.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for the question. I have really been committed to globally to the idea of community empowerment and eliminating poverty and addressing society's largest challenges. And I did have the opportunity to live almost 10 years in Budapest, Hungary. And that was in my 20s as I was just coming out of college and learning about international relations and how NGOs work at Open Society Institute.
NGOs, non-governmental organizations. Here we call them nonprofits.
That's what they call them over there, right?
They
It's a little
call them
different.
NGOs. Uh-huh.
Yeah, and only to find there's just so much important work to be done in my own backyard, sort of like Dorothy coming home. And so the rest of my career has really been devoted to nonprofit capacity building because I do believe that nonprofits hold the keys to the solutions to really all the problems that society faces.
I totally agree with you. You've also done some political work. You were elected to the school board in Prince George's County and also worked with my friend, former county executive Rashern Baker. Talk about being on the political side of things. How do you like it?
Yes, indeed. So I would not trade that experience for the world. I did spend 4 years on the school board, and at the time, my daughter was young, and I had, as you know, so many evening meetings and early morning meetings, and it was a lot to take on with a full-time job. So that was really the only reason why I left. I certainly loved the work, and one of the big achievements we did with that board in Prince George's County was really wrap our arms around what we mean by equity and making a difference from our leadership position as a board. And you also asked about Rashern Baker, former county executive in Prince George's County. And I actually did work on a couple of his campaigns, and he came out of the nonprofit sector. So that was exciting as well.
Yep. Rashern and I arrived in the House together. We were both elected in 1994. We each served 8 years and each got out and went in various directions. So I adore Rashern.
Yes.
So you've been with Maryland Nonprofits, as I said, for more than 14 years, and thank you for your leadership as a
Thank you.
consultant, as legislative, as vice president and as CEO. Talk about first off, to folks who may not know, why don't you talk about what Maryland Nonprofits is, the sort of services, who's a member? Give us a brief overview of that.
Sure. So Maryland Nonprofits is the statewide network for nonprofits of all shapes and sizes. We have more than 1,200 members from Western Maryland to Southern Maryland to the Eastern Shore. And we advocate for nonprofits, and Senator Kagan has just been a tremendous champion. You have been a tremendous champion, helping nonprofits get paid on time through the microbridge loan program, now looking at how we can streamline the grants program through the mega bill that you passed. So we really thank you for that. And we, excuse me, we do a tremendous amount of advocacy with and for nonprofits and the communities that they serve. And we also help nonprofits be better at what they do. So it's a very technical and wide skill set that you need to run a highly ethical and accountable nonprofit. And we have set standards for that, the standards for excellence, and we help organizations achieve them.
So why don't you talk a little bit about that? Because when I ran the Carl M. Freeman Foundation between my tenure in this House and then going to the Senate, we actually hired Maryland nonprofits to work with some of the great organizations in Maryland and in Delaware to really up their game. And so why don't you talk about some of the transparency, fiscal accountability, diversity, and some of the other aspects of standards for excellence?
Yes. So it sounds like you know them very well and have been through that process. So we want to make sure that all nonprofits have the tools that they need to make sure that they inspire confidence amongst their donors, board, and staff, and that they are ethical and accountable in the people that they serve, that they advance equity and have a plan for diversity and inclusion in their organizations. So it's a soup to nuts set of tools to help you improve. You don't have to get accredited in the standards in order to benefit from them, but we do offer that third party seal of approval that can help open doors for many nonprofits with their funding community, with their donor community.
That's exactly what I used to call it, the good housekeeping seal of approval.
Exactly.
It's a lot of work, but it's tremendously impressive when folks are able to accomplish that and earn that seal. We talk about,
Yes, they do describe it being a journey, and there are some difficult times, and you're asking us to do what kind of plan we have to put together, but invariably once they've gone through it, they tell us just how valuable it was, both for them, the staff leaders, and for the board of directors.
absolutely, absolutely, and for donors and prospective donors, because if we see that an organization has gone through that journey, we know that they're responsible and accountable and transparent, and that makes a corporate or charitable donation even more likely.
Exactly. And even government, there are a couple of local governments that give extra points to organizations that get the standards.
Yeah.
And, they want, you want to make sure that organizations do what they say they're going to do and are accountable without requiring reams and reams of paperwork all the time in oversight. So I think that's one way that funders can have that sense of confidence.
Well, and that just, I'm gonna just do the rollout for a second because you talked about MEGA and we didn't define what that was. So
Mhm.
that's the Maryland Efficient Grants and Accountability, and we passed it last year. I sponsored the bill based on a program in Illinois, and we talk about kids applying to college through a common app.
Right.
So efficient. You fill out one form, and then maybe you have to do a special essay for this college or a special essay for this university. But in general, you don't have to fill out your name and address and basic information 25 different times. And in the same way, our nonprofits should be focused on their mission and not filling out grant applications or grant reports. And so we're looking to streamline that. And your wonderful colleague, Henry Bogdan, the legislative person for Maryland Nonprofits, has been a partner and deeply connected in the rollout of the mega council to try to work on those common apps for nonprofits. So let's,
That's going to make such a big difference for so many nonprofits. And I think it's going to save money on the state budget as well, if it's more efficient all around.
totally, I agree, I agree. So let's talk about the diversity of your membership. So 1,200 organizations, everything from food pantries to arts organizations, historic preservation, literacy councils, everything. How is it that you all can provide services that are helpful to everybody? And how big a struggle is that sometimes?
So we do have a wide range of members, and there we have different kinds of programs for organizations of different sizes and with different needs. One very important program is the Nonprofit Development Center program that actually the Micro Bridge Loan Program, Nimble, is a part of that as well.
One of my
And that
favorite
provides
bills, I have to say. So common sense, up to $25,000 for any nonprofit that has a guaranteed grant or contract with federal, state, county, or municipal government, but the money hasn't come through yet, and you still have to make payroll and rent and all that. So the Department of Commerce has been a great partner in rolling that out, and hopefully we're getting more money into that account this year. Sorry
right.
to interrupt. Yes.
Yeah, no, it's so important, and it is a stopgap measure because there really isn't any good reason that nonprofits should have to front the money for a government contract, right? So we are trying to get governments to pay upfront when they contract, and contract on time and pay on time. Those are all important priorities. So that coming at that from the two sides, I think really helps. And so and the Nonprofit Development Center program is free for any nonprofit that is less than 10 years old and less than 750,000 in revenue. They can get free workshops, training, and those who really participate and get the most out of it, we can even do some one-on-one free consulting work through the Nonprofit Development Center program.
And
You also get
those
all of the
organizations,
standards for excellence basics. Yeah, go ahead.
do they have to be a member of Maryland Nonprofits to get this?
No, you don't. It's a very easy online application and there's no cost to participate.
That's amazing.
And you can visit marylandnonprofits.org and find the Nonprofit Development Center application.
That's perfect. And we are going to put your social media links and the website at the end as well, but totally feel free to continue sharing them here.
Thank you.
Let's talk about COVID.
Another thing I just wanted to add also about the diversity of our members, we are just uncovering some new data from our recent COVID-19 and racial equity survey. And we found that the smallest nonprofits are the most numerous, less than 25,000 in revenue. So those are essentially all volunteer organizations. And in our survey sample, 60% of the executive directors of those smallest organizations are people of color, which was really phenomenal. And on the other side, we see only 13% of very large organizations are led by people of color. So in the COVID environment, supporting Black and Brown led nonprofits and helping them, because they're the ones who are every weekend out there on the food drives, supporting the very neediest among us, and they're doing it with very little or no support. So that's an important point to add.
So let's talk about the impact of COVID on the nonprofit sector. So first, let's talk about the actual workings of it. Then we'll get to the finances and the demand for services. So first, how are nonprofits keeping their staff and boards connected? How are they communicating with the community? What have you seen that's been creative and impressive?
Yes, so we did play a role in helping organizations pivot, and they've also been very creative in not only holding board meetings virtually, but even recruiting new board members and committees, and all of the work of boards is mostly happening virtually. We are seeing about 20 to 30% of the nonprofits have maintained in-person offices and in-person programs in the community. So just a reminder that nonprofits are a very critical part of our safety net. And so those are mental health services, food services, life-saving health services, clinics, and now nonprofits are active in delivering vaccines. So in many ways, I think nonprofits have been creative, resourceful, and ready to serve, and really on the front lines of what communities need.
Does Maryland Nonprofits help people network to swap best ideas and share best practices?
We do. We was a weekly member meeting last year. Now it's gone to bi-weekly this year, where members can come and share information, share resources. We also started, we're incubating Maryland Latinos Unidos for Latino-led organizations and Latino serving organizations. They have a monthly meeting where they're sharing resources and data. So we can always do more of that. And there's such a need for networking and collaboration across the sector.
Fantastic. So let's talk about the financial realities. So before we get to the demand, fundraising, the annual gala canceled, the annual anything generally canceled. So talk about the financial hit in terms of private giving, big gifts, smaller gifts, and then government grants. How's that all been going for the nonprofit sector in Maryland?
So it's quite varied depending on what kind of nonprofit you're running. And in general, like I said, the racial equity issues are playing out in that more white-led organizations have been more in that pivot and thrive category, whereas more Black-led organizations saw greater losses in revenue from certain sources, which was distressing and needs to be corrected. So we saw that most nonprofits who transferred their fundraisers to a virtual event did not raise as much money and did not net as much money.
Hmm.
However, there was a subset, about 17% of the nonprofits raised more money and raised more net money. So we're looking at what are they doing differently? What are we learning from the organizations that have succeeded with their online fundraising events? And part of it has been you almost have to put 2 or 3 times as much work into an online event as you do an in-person event, because it needs higher production values, and you need to have all of your stakeholders with their commitments in advance and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Nationwide, donations stayed about steady or even grew a little bit during COVID, but again, the impact has been very uneven. The organizations that are having the most difficulty are ones that cannot really do their mission online very well, especially child serving organizations, group homes or day programs for seniors, and as well as arts and theater performances and things like that.
Right. One of the challenges that I've had just personally is after sitting on Zoom meetings all day in hearings and voting sessions and webinars and all that, the last thing I sometimes feel like doing is sitting down and watching a play or watching a concert. And yet I desperately miss the arts. There's nothing like doing it in person though. So that's got to be a challenge for them.
It absolutely has been. And this is where government support has been critical. We were part of the advocacy to ensure that nonprofits were part of the Paycheck Protection Program from the federal level. We're continuing to try to, create changes to that program to make it more accessible. And there have been numerous funds at the state and local levels that the legislature, thank you very much, just passed the Emergency COVID Relief Act that has $20 million in funding for nonprofits. And that it has been a critical lifeline and will continue to be very much needed.
Right. And do you happen to know how nonprofits did in the latest $1.9 trillion federal package?
As far as I know, I believe they have solved some of the barriers to the Paycheck Protection Program for larger organizations that were not able to participate before. The other thing that they also renewed the additional charitable deductions for donors that are available. So the additional $300 charitable deduction has been renewed for 2021. And we're also seeing that the direct aid to the state and local governments will play an important role for nonprofits as well, because those are entities that both fund through grants, but also contract with nonprofits. And so, when they sneeze, the nonprofit sector catches a cold, right? So we need to make sure that our local governments have the resources as well.
Right. And one of the bills that we're working on together is allowing nonprofits to delay reimbursing their unemployment trust fund payments. That's been a challenge. And some of the small nonprofits were given a pass on that, and businesses were, but nonprofits with more than 50 employees were overlooked. And so we've been working on that together. And I thank you for that. I'm hoping that we can move forward.
Yes, thank you so much for your support of that. For those nonprofits who unfortunately had to lay off many staff, obviously you do that because you don't have the resources, and then to be hit with a big unemployment bill, that's just too much. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. So we're working on that. We had a good hearing, and hopefully we'll move that forward. Let's talk about demand on the services of nonprofits briefly. Do you have any statistics or anecdotes or anything that you'd like to share?
Yeah, so what has been interesting about demand is just about every experience you could possibly have around demand is what the data is telling us. So we had, slightly increase, dramatically increase, slightly decrease, dramatically decrease, and stay the same were the choices. And it was almost even 20% in every category of that. So at Maryland Nonprofits, our demand has increased tremendously. So we served 3 times as many people in 2020 as the prior year with all of these governmental changes and the needs for applying for the funds, policies for opening and closing down your office. All of these things have been tremendous, and nonprofits have needed to look to us as a resource. But again, if you're a after school program for youth, parents don't want their kids on another Zoom call, obviously.
Right.
And so that's the kind of programs that experienced, real cratering of demand.
Yep. Yep.
And as we think going forward about those programs, I think it's not only, we just think about what does it look like when we come back and those are no longer available to us if those have gone out of business. So keeping the organizations afloat who are not in high demand is almost as important as, the food banks and the mental health and the other crisis related things.
Yep. Critical. Just one more question before we pivot to the Fast Five. Can you talk about, there are a lot of nonprofit leaders, in my experience, that equate being political, as in partisan political, with advocacy. So can you talk about advocacy and some of your priorities this year or in general, thematically, and then how do you do at recruiting folks to engage with contacting their legislators at any level of government?
Thank you so much for asking such an important question. And many nonprofit boards and leaders do think that because they're a 501c3, that means that they cannot take a position on legislation. And nothing could be further from the truth. Nonprofits absolutely can and should advocate for their mission and the people that they serve. We often find the caution around getting involved in advocacy is sometimes coming from the lawyers who are on the board. So we also have a couple lawyers on our staff who can provide the legal foundations for you to be involved. And there are some capacities that you want to make sure your organization has. You want to have a policy on advocacy and an outline of how you're going to take positions. So if someone asks you, can you sign on our sign-on letter? Do I have that authority, or is that something I need to check with the board? And did we talk about this? Is it within our mission? So those are important things. And I do want to also talk about our priorities for this year, because I know you have been a big part of that. So one of the things coming out of that was a pre-existing inequity, I think overall, COVID has laid bare and exacerbated pre-existing inequities in our system. And the digital divide has been harmful for people in rural areas, people in urban areas, all over the state. We have hundreds of thousands of children and households who do not have regular access to broadband and laptops. And the infrastructure is simply not there in our state due to years of inattention to this issue. And so we're advocating for bridging that digital divide. Housing is also big during COVID, and again, pre-existing inequities. And so that's another area where we've been active. Over the years, we have always advocated for the level of resources in the state of Maryland to be at an appropriate level to support community services. So you mentioned, we have members in all different mission areas, and we don't want to fund the arts at the expense of the environment, or fund mental health at the expense of disabilities. So we really need to make sure that Maryland's budget is sustainable and equitable for the needs of Maryland's communities.
I always talk about all boats rise. And we need all counties, all size nonprofits, all missions to get equal access to government support and to serve our communities. So that's totally helpful. I can tell you one of my pet peeves, and you've surely heard me say this over the years, but I sort of scold the nonprofit sector whenever I speak at your annual conferences or any event. They are so reluctant and apologetic. Oh, sorry to bother you, but would you mind? Could you please? I was like, if every food pantry, homeless shelter, battered women's shelter, literacy council shut their doors, who would pick up the slack? Government. And that would be an expense and higher taxes. So we need to support the nonprofit sector. We must, it's in our fiscal self-interest, let alone from a policy perspective, it's all vital. So, and there are nonprofits in every single legislative district. And so I think my colleagues kind of, get that and understand the importance. So We just need
You
everybody
know,
to
I
be
think
much
that's so
more
important
vocal.
that you state that, Senator Kagan, because I was actually in a meeting where a professional lobbyist, we were talking about whether we should testify at a particular hearing. And a professional lobbyist said, you know, I think the legislators are getting tired of so much testimony and so many Zoom calls. And I was thinking, isn't it their job to listen to their constituents? You know, we have important points that we need to bring it forward, right?
100%. And it's not like you represent some tiny fraction of our constituency or the economy. We're talking about 10, 12, 13% of jobs in Maryland, of the GDP. So we absolutely need to hear from our nonprofit partners. And that's the
Thank
way
you
we
for
need to
mentioning
think of
that,
it.
Senator Kagan, because the nonprofit sector is often forgotten. And you've been such an advocate for making sure, are you convening small businesses?
Right.
Nonprofits need to be at the table. Are you developing an economic development plan for a particular region? Nonprofits need to be
Right.
part of that. And we really appreciate that advocacy on your behalf,
Thank
on
you.
your part.
Well, I want to give a shout out to my friend and colleague, Senator Katie Fry Hester from Howard and Carroll counties, because when she convened Senator's small business work group and caucus, and we convened, it's bipartisan, it's all over the state, and from the very beginning, I said, what about the nonprofits? And she has been totally on board and very responsive, very interested in including the nonprofit sector in her
That's
work.
great.
So she's been wonderful. So,
Terrific.
all right. So Heather Iliff, it's time for your Fast Five. These are going to be 5 quick questions. I want you to give us your answers and let people get to know you better.
Okay,
So,
thank you.
First, what from your tremendous professional career, what are you proudest of?
I am most proud of right now at Maryland Nonprofits, we have a staff team that is working on all cylinders like you wouldn't believe and providing so much support and love for each other. That I think is what I'm most proud of. We have done a lot of work over a number of years to get to this point, and because of that, we were able to really be a resource for the nonprofit sector. But that probably wasn't fast enough for your Fast Five.
You know what?
So, all right,
that was probably a bad question to include as part of the Fast Five. So this one.
All right, I'll go faster.
How are you staying healthy during the coronavirus?
I meditate, walk, and spend time with my dogs and chickens.
Love that. Okay. How many dogs, how many chickens?
Well, sadly, about 10 days ago, one of our dogs passed. So now we're down to 1 dog. I just realized that I had used the plural, and we have 14 chickens.
Oh my, okay. What was your best COVID purchase?
I would say very comfy yoga pants.
Nice, okay. If there were a movie being made about you, which actress would you want to star as you?
Oh gosh, you know, I am so pathetic with pop culture and knowing who's famous. You know, I always loved Jodie Foster, so let's go with her.
Okay, that works. And the 5th question, the one that I ask everybody, Heather Iliff, what is your hidden superpower? What is a skill that you have, something you're really good at that most folks can't do?
I would say I am able to take in large amounts of information and make sense of it very quickly and try to hone in on the key points.
That's fantastic. That's very valuable.
Well, thank you.
Heather, thank you for joining us for this episode of Kibbitzing with Kagan, and thank you for all that you do every day for the critically important nonprofits that serve our residents around the state in so many ways and are struggling and surviving during this coronavirus challenge. So thank you. Stay safe, stay well, and I look forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you so much, Senator Kagan. The pleasure is all mine.
Thank you.